And we're live. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this edition of No Capes. I am here today with Ben Edmunds of PHP Town Hall fame, among other things. Say hi, Ben.
What's up, everyone?
All right, so let's get started. For anyone who doesn't know who you are, who are these people? You're the CTO of a very cool company, and you are the co-host of PHP Town Hall, and the author.
That British guy, Phil Sturgeon.
That British fellow. So let's talk about podcasts for a second. How did you guys get started with Town Hall?
Yeah, so it's kind of a long story. Well, not long because I don't ever talk much. But a few years ago, we were both really involved in CodeIgniter. It's a framework for PHP. And we used to do a drunken town hall, CI drunken town hall is what we called it. So it was using TinyChat or some chat client before Google Hangouts was a thing. So it was several years ago. And we'd all just kind of get drunk and chat about CodeIgniter and where it's at. And it was easier back then because it wasn't really, it was a small community. So we could have 20 people on there, and that's everybody that was pretty active at the time. And it was really fun. You know, it really gave you that kind of community and friends and stuff, and we'd all hang out every couple weeks or so on there. Fast forward a couple years, and we didn't really have anything like that anymore. You know, CodeIgniter changed, and people had left, and we weren't really that involved anymore at the time. And so we started talking. I tried to do a couple that were just kind of PHP, drunken PHP town hall things, but it was kind of weird because you can't get everyone that's involved in PHP in the same video chat. And me and Phil started talking. I think he actually suggested it, a podcast, and then we'll just kind of pull in one or two people each week, talk about the state of things, and really kind of do the same idea where we're chatting about the current status of things in PHP, but not quite as interactive as it used to be, not much of the group thing. So yeah, that's where it came from. And now the after show is more like the old Drunken Town Hall, where we're all just kind of hanging out and talking shit.
Much more exclusive now, though, thanks to
Google Hangouts 10-person limit. There's always a line to get into the after show.
So, it kind of evolved rather naturally, but did you have any hurdles to jump with starting a podcast?
The biggest one is Phil Sturgeon. He's incredibly bad at time zones, and so for the first probably 15 episodes, he never got the time right, and we were always late. The only other hurdle really is that we're both pretty unorganized when it comes to the podcast because we try not to take it too seriously. We want to have fun. It's not professional like No Capes, and so we're very unorganized. We hardly ever have questions, and we just kind of wing it. But that's what we want. We want it to be that real, just kind of having a conversation vibe.
Right, not at all like No Capes.
Yeah.
So how do you go about getting people to come on your podcast? Has that ever been difficult?
No, sometimes it's hard to figure out who we want to have next, or we reuse guests like Josh Lockhart and forget that he was on 2 other times, and we're like, yay, we finally got Josh on. Wait. So that's how organized we are. But it's pretty easy. Having Phil as a co-host helps a lot because everybody knows Phil. Sometimes they hate him, so they won't come on, but they know him at least.
Not to make this the Phil show, but we actually do have a Phil-related question.
Oh, all right, let's do it.
So, what is your funniest Phil story?
This is probably... I don't know if this is a good context for that.
No, it was mostly a joke question.
It's not.
But it came on Twitter, and I had to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are a CTO now, which I'm sure we all know means that you do meetings most of the day.
That's pretty much what I do.
But once upon a time, I heard that you used to be a pretty good developer. So how did you get started as a developer?
How did I get started? My first website, I think, was when I was 10 or 11 years old. My dad needed a website for his business, and it sounded fun for some reason to my 10-year-old mind. And I learned HTML. I don't even think I used CSS. I think it was just all tables. And threw together a little website, and I loved it. You know, creating something from nothing, and look at this. And it was amazing. And I was hooked ever since then. I learned Perl shortly after, started doing Perl CGI stuff, then moved on to C. Then for a while I moved back to like doing hardware stuff, and that was actually my first job, was doing like fixing computers and servers and that kind of thing. But while I was there, I was still playing around with programming on the side, and I ended up like automating away most of the work that was involved in fixing all these computers that came in. So we always did the same thing basically. So I just automated it all, and they loved it, and I was hooked again. So I pretty much moved back into dev after that because it reminded me of why I loved it so much.
Okay, so how did you get into PHP then? You said Perl,
PHP,
C.
yes, I did Perl, then C, then Visual Basic for a while, and C Sharp, then PHP. So I was at a job, I was doing some C Sharp stuff, and we were automating robotics automation. And then we had this need to take the data out of the robots and display it somewhere for reporting purposes or general real-time, what's going on right now kind of thing. And the easiest solution for that was PHP. So there I started doing what's called SCADA systems. It's where you do basically real-time dashboard reporting of things as they happen in a production environment. So we would say, this many robots are doing these many parts per hour, stupid stuff like that. But again, I was kind of hooked, and seeing people really use your software at that point, use it on their computers, and it was great. PHP was a great tool. I wrote horribly bad PHP back then. It was all procedural with queries mixed into views, and it was so bad. But I loved it and kept going with it. I've jumped around a bit. I do Python and Ruby every now and then, but still love PHP.
Okay, so do you remember what your first framework was? Talk about doing controllers and views and stuff. What was your first framework?
First framework was probably one I built myself, I'm sure, because I was that dumb and thought I could do it better. Then after that, I used Zen for a little while, and then I think CodeIgniter is where I landed pretty much after that. I went through a phase for a couple months where I just tried every framework I could find, and landed on CodeIgniter is the one I liked the most.
Okay, so talking of CodeIgniter, you mentioned it a few times. I was once upon a time a very avid CodeIgniter dev. So the way I know you, is actually through one of your CodeIgniter libraries that you wrote, IonAuth. At the time that I was looking at it anyway, it was probably the most popular authentication library for CodeIgniter. So how did you go about, how did that come to be?
Yeah, so I had a project at work where I needed to make some type of app. Don't remember what it was. And I couldn't, CodeIgniter was, of course, my tool of choice at that point. And I couldn't find an auth system that really did what I needed to do in a way that I liked it done. And so I found, I want to say it was called ReduxAuth, but I could be incorrect. And it was close, but it was really buggy and just wasn't anywhere near. So I took that and I finished it basically, and kept adding to it from there. And that became IonAuth eventually, because the author of Redux left CodeIgniter completely and didn't care about keeping it. And since we're on the Phil story, that's actually how I met Phil, was through IonAuth, and that spawned our friendship as well, because we started working on that way back when together.
I actually did not know that. So
Yeah.
for all of you PHP Town Hall enjoyers, you can thank IonAuth for that. So was IonAuth your first big open source thing?
It's my first big one, and it's the only one that's still really popular. It's definitely my most popular thing I've ever done, and that's both awesome and sad.
Okay. So it's still getting active use. Do you still get active?
Oh yeah, it's still very active. I know in the modern PHP community, people think CodeIgniter's dead, but it's still pretty active. We still have lots of users. Still plenty of legacy sites and new sites being used with it. And I'm still involved with CodeIgniter, actually. I'm on the CI Council now. They're basically like decision-making board. And so I'm still involved with current developments. I don't actually code on it, but we decide what's coming next and what we should do in the future. I'm trying to shape the future of it a bit. We're not going to make it crazy modern. Like, it's not going to be a Symfony or Laravel or anything like that. But we want to keep the old premise of CodeIgniter where it's super easy for the new developer to use, and but make it work with Composer, use some PSRs, and be more up to date. So we're working on that for CodeIgniter version 4. And version 3 actually should drop any day now. I believe it's an RC3, but it's still lagging pretty far behind because it's been in a long review process.
Okay, so is it in beta right now, or is it dropping into beta, dropping?
No, it's an RC.
Stable.
It's a release candidate, and it's pretty stable right now. Probably within, I have to check the board, but within days or at least weeks, you should see it stable.
Awesome. So everyone check that out. And I want to talk a little bit more about the council, but we'll do that in a minute. So back to open source and Ionos, this being your first very popular package. Were there any hurdles that you found, maybe problems you encountered that you didn't expect to?
I think the biggest one is people. That's always the biggest problem in software, right? It's people. It took a while to get used to answering pull requests, answering issues in the right way. I try to lead people to the right answers, try to help them learn from it, but at the same time, not accept crap. So the really big premise of the Ionoff was that it needed to be simple, and it needed to do things well, but not do everything you could possibly think of. So I turned down a lot of pull requests and a lot of issues, and just tell people it's out of scope. If you need that, add it on and use it yourself. Feel free to have another fork somewhere. And I'll promote it. So pretty often somebody will come up and be like, I need this feature. I say, sorry, it's not supported, but here's this PR. You can go merge it in and it'll add it to it. So probably just the management of features plus people, keeping people happy, yet not giving into everything they want was kind of the biggest thing for me.
Okay, did you ever, I know we've all seen on Reddit or Twitter, the horrible kind of vitriol that can sometimes happen inside comment threads on GitHub, as with comment threads anywhere. Did you ever get any kind of backlash as part of that project?
I really don't remember any. Of course, there's always the people that aren't happy with your choice, and they say they're going to fork it, or I've had people fork it and change all the copyright info, and it's still 90% my code underneath. But nothing real no Reddit-style threads going on. I try to keep it very simple. I'm not very much of an instigator like some project maintainers.
So how do you handle it when somebody forks your code, changes all the copyright information, and doesn't change much else?
I believe there's a process on GitHub, but I haven't been through that. Usually I just ask them, hey, can you at least change the name of the project? At least add an attribution in the README, things like that. So I don't want someone else putting out Ionoff under their name. That's not cool. And I don't want someone else using 90% of my code without at least attributing where that 90% came from. And if they do that, we're cool. If not, I guess I would take to the Twitters, but I haven't had to do that yet.
Take to the Twitters. Okay. So we're kind of jumping around here a little bit, and you'll have to excuse me for that. But as you're, learning Perl and C and PHP and Python and all these other things that you've learned from an obviously very young age, did you have any mentors along the way? Anyone that kind of helped you out?
No, I was just always a genius.
Just
no.
Amazingly brilliant.
So I've had a lot of people that kind of came in and out of my life that really influenced me and helped me. Wouldn't necessarily say they had any long-term mentors, but there's that first job where I started PHP. There was a guy there who was already doing it, and worked with him for 3 years, and he really moved me along the path a lot. Really pushed me to learn more. There have been plenty of bosses. The job I'm at now, the CEO, has been a big influence throughout several years, really pushing me to learn more. Not maybe necessarily as a coding influence, but really pushing, let's push boundaries, let's keep learning new things, stuff like that.
Okay. And now that you're kind of more advanced in your career, do you do any mentoring yourself?
I do, but mostly it's people that work for me. I put a lot of time into my job, probably more than I should, but I really enjoy what I do. And so whenever I hire someone, I really try to to take the time to train them well. And I enjoy taking someone that's like a junior dev, maybe a little further past that, and really kind of training them up and helping them grow and pushing them. I have James who works for me, who people probably seen on the town hall after parties. He started out a year or two ago as a very junior dev, and he submitted to his first conference this month. So I was pretty excited about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's congrats, James, if you're watching. An hour later. Yay. Speaking of speaking, you do some of that too. So how did you get started speaking?
That was a nice segue. Phil, actually, because let's just talk about Phil for an hour. He threw the CodeIgniter conference in New York back in 2011, and we were buddies, and he asked me to speak, and hell yeah, free trip to New York. And that was my first talk. It was horrible. I had like a 45-minute slot. I think I spoke for maybe 20 minutes, and I couldn't answer like half the QA questions because I was just horribly unprepared, and it was horrible. But it was a good learning experience. It really kind of broke me into it. And it was another thing where I did it, and I just loved it, and I really wanted to master it and get good at it. It's really nice to convey your ideas in that format. It's very different than like a blog post or anything like that. So you can really kind of get your passion across in a different way and compel people. And the best thing about it, though, really to me, is you expose people to these ideas, and then you have conversations afterwards and really kind of work through it with people, and you find people that are very interested in it, and you're able to point them in the right direction, help them maybe fix some problem they're having. And it's really nice to kind of mentor in that way. It's not mentor like one-on-one, but it's, you know, training people.
Do you remember what that first talk was about?
It was Git deployments.
Okay. And so going up on stage the first time, even though you say you did terribly, were you nervous?
I was incredibly nervous. I don't like throw up or anything. It wasn't that bad, but I was just shaking, definitely. I'm sure my voice was wavering. I already talk low, so when I'm scared, I talk really low, so probably people couldn't hear me.
That's interesting. I think most people get higher when they're scared. You get lower.
Oh no, I mean volume, not necessarily pitch.
Okay, so after you're up there like trying to Barry White to talk. It's a bit odd. Okay, so now that you've got considerably more talks under your belt, do you still get nervous?
I get nervous with new talks. Usually, once I get the talk about 3 times, I feel like I have it down pretty well. So if I'm getting a talk I've given usually 2 times before, I feel fairly confident in it, and I don't really get nervous. About 5 minutes before, I get a real surge of adrenaline, which is fun, but I wouldn't really say I'm nervous. I'm more kind of pumped.
Okay, so let's walk through the whole process then. How do you come up with ideas for talks?
A lot of it is there's a CFP, and either they have the track, so a CFP, for people that don't know, is a call for papers. Most conferences will put out a CFP, maybe 6 months before their conference or a little sooner. And they say, hey, we're going to have these tracks. We need talks related to these areas. Submit your proposals, and we'll decide who we're going to have speak at the conference. So either it's a track where I feel like I have some knowledge or experience that could be helpful to that, or it's either I hit something and I realize that, hey, there's a lot of other people who don't seem to get this, and it's something I really care about, and then I write a talk for it. Most of the time, though, I'll write proposals, and I'll get accepted to a conference before I write the talk. And that's because you don't always know what talks will be good at conferences or what ideas organizers will want presented there, and it's a pretty big time investment to write a talk. Probably get like 20 to 40 hours to write a good talk, and it's kind of not worth the investment unless you know that it is what people want to hear about. Because I might be excited about something and no one else cares about it at all.
Fair enough. There's actually been a couple people, I think, talking about this recently, about whether or not to write the talk before you submit or submit before you write it. Are there any downsides, you think, or any extra steps that you need to take when you're submitting an abstract to make sure that...
Yeah, so the biggest thing probably is making sure you are actually like a subject matter expert, or at least close to it, making sure you do have experience in that topic. Don't just throw out a topic because it sounds fun or cool. and then go learn about it. You are up there, you're maybe not being paid in money, but you're being paid in compensation, usually for the travel. People are paying for the tickets, so they're expecting you to really be able to give them advice and help them through a problem. And so you don't want to get up there and not really know what you're talking about. But also there's the whole thing of most of us probably feel like we don't know enough about anything. And so you can't let that stop you either. So if it's something you have experience in and you know how to do, don't let your fear stop you from submitting. I think there is an advantage to pre-writing a talk, because obviously it's something you're passionate enough about to risk wasting that time on. Personally, for me, that's not usually how I go about it, because I do want to make sure it's accepted before I put the time into it. But really, it's just making sure you know the topic. Also, write your talks early. There's a lot of people that'll get they'll get accepted to a conference, and then they write the talk the weekend before. I think that's pretty unprofessional. You're probably getting $1,000 worth of compensation for going to the conference. You can at least think about it a couple weeks beforehand. I am horrible about tweaking my slides up until the last minute. So usually on the plane right there, I'm finishing my last 10 slides or adding to the talk. But at least about a month before, I've basically got all my dids in place.
So the first conference that you spoke at was Phil's, so you kind of had it in there. After that, did you have any trouble getting accepted?
I wish I remembered, actually. I don't remember what my second conference was. So I do still get turned down. It's not like I get accepted at every conference I submit at. I probably get accepted to maybe half the conferences I submit to still. And a lot of that is either they want repeat guests that they know, or repeat speakers that they know will do a good job, or maybe they don't. Maybe they want fresh faces. So there's that. But also maybe the talks I'm giving aren't applicable to that crowd, or maybe the talks I'm giving are already being covered by someone else. There's a lot of factors into it. I don't really take it personally. I know a lot of people that do, and a lot of people that get upset if they're not accepted. And personally, to me, it's fine. It just tells me, either there's a better fit or I should work on my abstracts more usually.
Okay, so talking about abstracts, that's actually one of the things that I know a lot of people struggle with, because it's actually really hard. Do you have any tips or tricks or things you actually should not do in an abstract?
I think you shouldn't be too detailed. There's some abstracts that are like 10 paragraphs long, and that's really too much information. You got to think about this abstract is most likely going to be posted on the website. So if you're looking through a conference website, what information do you want to know about that talk? You also want to make it sound fun. That can be hard for developers. You just want to put like technical details. But again, think about if you're reading through the conference website, what kind of talk do you want to go to? Do you want to go to one that sounds entertaining, one that sounds like, oh yeah, this is something I want to learn about, but it's presented in a compelling style? Or do you want to go to the one that's like 20 bullet points of the slides you're going to see? So really try to think of it in like a story context. You're telling a story, it's going to be a good time, and you're going to get this idea across to these people.
Okay. That's anything that you absolutely should not do, other than, making it too long?
Not really. I'm not a huge fan of I don't put too much cursing in my abstracts or titles. I have made that mistake in the past. It's something that's kind of unprofessional, and definitely conference organizers see it that way. I do probably curse way too much during my conference talks, but I try to filter that out. Try to make it professional yet kind of fun and lighthearted, usually. And just not too technical, but definitely get your point across. Don't make it just a pitch. Really show what you're going to teach people. Also, if anyone's kind of scared about that or working on abstracts, there are several people that will help you with that. So I, of course, would love to help anyone with their abstracts. I think Ed Finkel's offered to, Kyle Evans usually offers to, and Kayla Daniels offers to. So if you need help writing an abstract, if you're intimidated by it in any way, or maybe you're submitting and you're not getting accepted, feel free to reach out to some people and ask for help.
Cool. So talking about profanity in talks, so you already said that you don't do it in abstracts or titles. Do you have any rules about when you will or won't swear in a talk, or is it just kind of how it goes?
It kind of depends. So the talks that I'm more comfortable with, I usually tend to swear less. when I'm nervous with the talk, it seems like I swear more. And I think it's kind of, the more I give it, the less conversational it is for me, the more kind of rehearsed it is. But when I'm first giving a talk, it's still kind of conversational. I'm still kind of figuring it out as I go. I do practice my talks beforehand. I usually record myself and listen back once or twice. But I don't like the idea of the script. Like, I really like the idea of just kind of winging stuff. And that's where I'm best, personally. Some people are best if they rehearse things like crazy. But personally, I'm best if I just kind of get up there and wing it a bit. So the first couple times, I don't have a good rhythm going, and I tend to kind of fill silences or work out ideas when cuss a lot in between there. I think it's about a good level. Generally, psychologically, a couple cuss words usually endears people to you, but if you're swearing like a sailor, that can be a real turnoff. But it also depends on your crowd. If you're speaking at like Open West is in Utah, and they advise their speakers it'd be best if you don't cuss, because most of their attendees from Utah will be Mormon, probably. And so you do want to consider your audience. If it's going to be offensive to your audience, you don't want to do that. You're there for them, not for you.
Okay, that's fair enough. Have you ever, other than Open West, which advises not to, have you ever been specifically asked not to swear by a conference organizer?
Just Open West and Ski PHP, and they're now merged into Open West, so it's basically the same conference. So that's the only time I've been asked not to.
Okay, fair enough. I've heard some speakers have different rules for whether they'll swear based on whether or not they're being recorded. Do you follow anything like that?
I have no problem swearing when I'm recorded, as you'll tell from listening to this and from the PHP Town Hall. So I'm not that professional, I guess.
Touche. Okay. So you already said that you're kind of more of an off-the-cuff fella. Do you rehearse your talks at all?
Oh yeah, I usually go through it about twice, just when I'm developing the talk. I'll record myself and I'll listen back. A lot of that is for pacing. So as you're telling a story, pacing really matters a lot. And also making sure I'm going to hit the proper time limit. Make sure I don't go over time or go under time. Usually for me, when a talk's new, I'm more likely to talk super fast and finish in 30 minutes. But if a talk I'm comfortable with, I'm more likely to go over time. So there's still kind of a balance both ways.
Wow, so you can record yourself and then watch it? Or listen to it?
I can. I hate my voice the entire time, but I have the willpower to get through it.
That is a skill. The first person who can come up with an automated way to watch my talks and tell me if I'm too fast or too slow wins all my dollars.
Could probably get on like Mechanical Turk.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, could be a thing. I don't really have that many dollars to win, so it's not that big of a deal, but could be a thing. Okay, so let's talk about slides and talks in general. So you have an idea, you've had an abstract, you've been accepted. How do you go about actually writing your talk?
I usually lay an outline first, so kind of think of it as like a general presentation in school or anything like that. You might have the experience of a business presentation. Usually you want to get outlined first. These are the ideas I want to get across, and then I'll go through and I'll write maybe a paragraph on each item, something like that, and try to work it into an overall arc or story. Not necessarily a story, because I'm not much of a storyteller, but you got to think of it as we're starting here, we're going to get here, and we're going to finish here. So what's the whole arc of what we're going to cover? Make sure it flows well together. You don't want just a bunch of random pieces of information scattered throughout the talk. You want it to be a consistent thing that feels like it has a good start, middle, and end. So I work that out usually on paper, and then I'll sketch out some slide ideas. Usually I just use the paper app on my iPad and sketch out. These are kind of the basics I want to cover with a few slides. Then I'll take that and I'll move that into Keynote, and then I really build up the content of it. I spend a lot of time on the notes in Keynote, which is good and bad. It helps me to have something to go through as I'm reading the slide. I try to put as little as possible on each slide, so maybe just a sentence or a few bullet points, and then I'll have notes that tell me what I'm going to talk about with those to really expound on them. The only bad part there is if you're on Keynote and your presentation setup's not good, you don't always see your notes, because maybe you're doing an AirPlay or something where what's on your screen is what's on the projector. And so you do really need to know the content as well, but it is nice to have hidden notes to keep you on track.
Yeah, definitely. That can come in handy. Um, okay, so Q&A after your talk's over and you've got the Q&A. Other than the first time where you already said it was pretty horrible, do you find that that is easier or harder or
Q&A is
neither?
my favorite. I love Q&A, and that's when you find out what pieces were interesting to people, what pieces you didn't explain as well, and you get to help people with real world problems. So that's my favorite part. Um, the only hard part of that is sometimes you get people that really they just want to prove that they know the topic better than you, or they want to prove that they're smart for some reason. You get that a lot. You also get people that ask like a really good question and you have no idea what the answer is. And I'm usually pretty quick to say, I don't know. Let's talk later and we'll look at it and see. Or I'll open it to the room and see if anybody else knows and try to get them to talk later after the talk. But other than that, usually it's good questions related to the content. You can help people, point them in the right direction, or just tell them that's complicated. We'll talk about it later and figure that out for you. But it's really nice to get that interaction with the crowd, with the community, and see which parts could be better and which parts are good.
Okay, yeah. So for me, I know personally that the Q&A is probably still one of the scarier parts, just because it's not something you can rehearse. But I like your take on it. That it's almost like the first step of feedback to see what you explained well and what you didn't. I think that's a good way to approach it. So I think we have covered pretty much top to bottom talking. Oh, actually, reviews on Joined In, and feedback that comes in after the fact.
Right.
Have you ever had really bad reviews?
I've had a couple like 1 stars, and those still sting. Like you feel good about the talk, whatever. I may get a role where if I'm getting another talk, I won't go read my reviews until after all my talks are done, because if I get bad reviews, I just hate myself and it kills my confidence. And so if I get a bad review before I get my last talk, it'll really mess up my next talk. So I don't check them usually until the last day of the conference or when I'm done giving talks. And yeah, so you definitely get bad reviews. You try to put it in context, though. If you get 90% good reviews and a couple bad ones, it's you help 90% of the people there, and that's not such a bad thing.
That's also a very good way to look at it. Um, do you take, when you get a bad review, do you take that not to heart necessarily, but do you
Yeah, so
approach
there's been a lot of maybe bad reviews, maybe just kind of middle of the road reviews, and I try to take the feedback there and I try to learn from it. So if there's something where someone doesn't feel like a topic was explained well, or maybe they just didn't understand what I was trying to get across, that is feedback that you can totally use and can help you. The one thing I try to watch out for is the people that, again, just seem like they want to prove that they know more about the topic than you, which at first makes you feel like you shouldn't be up there. You're like, hey, this person picked all these holes in my ideas or my explanations, and that can be a hit. But if you really think about it, you're up there for 45 minutes, and you're trying to get a big idea across, and there's no way you can cover every hole or every piece of that. So there's a give and take, and you have to just be confident in your abilities and be glad you helped the 90%.
Okay, fair enough. Now, the conference space in PHP is not terribly large. I mean, there are several conferences, but not an infinite number. And I know that there's a lot of times when there are speakers out there that are giving talks on a subject that you want to talk on. For instance, I know both you and Phil give API talks. Do you ever have any kind of hesitance based on that, knowing that somebody is out there giving a talk on a topic that you want to speak on?
Yeah, sometimes. Of course, personally, I feel like Phil does a much better job than I do explaining APIs. But it's also every conference doesn't want to invite Phil, and for some reason people think I do an okay job, and so there's that. There's always the thing where you feel like somebody's doing a better job than you at it, but they can't go to every conference, and maybe you're not as bad as you think. Maybe you're a little self-conscious. There's that kind of part to it. So I try not to let it stop me, and I rarely do let it stop me, but it is definitely a thought in the back of your head.
Well, that's good. I mean, I have a pretty realist view that, yeah, you think about it, but no, it shouldn't stop you. Do you ever worry about stepping on toes, I guess? So if somebody's kind of the token something person, PHP, I cannot, somebody's a token testing person, um, or if Phil were the token API guy, would you ever feel like you're stepping on toes by submitting abstracts?
No. Maybe I should. Maybe it's a lack of empathy there, but not really.
No, I think no is a good answer. I don't think you should worry too much about toe stepping. It's always good to share ideas. Okay, so going back to mentoring, and you were talking about your team. What do you think, as a senior developer or CTO, trying to mentor a junior developer, what do you think is the single most important thing that you try to teach your team?
Okay. One big thing.
Top three?
Yeah. So I guess one of the biggest things, especially as a junior, that's hard to understand, is that you're not just solving a technical problem. You know, it's not just how do you, of course it happens, but usually you're not like just writing a sorting algorithm. Usually you're developing a feature that a person is going to use in some way. And so the end result isn't always just code. You got to really think through the process, and you want to deliver that end result. So it's more about thinking through what the end result needs to be and working back from there, and really delivering a holistic solution that can be flexible later. And that's something that most senior developers have learned over time. They've learned not just to code to this exact situation, but to really think through how it could be used later, how it'll change over time, how the user is going to use it. But juniors don't usually have that context in their head, and that can be something that takes years to learn. And so I really try to help them along with that.
Okay, yeah, so I think that kind of falls more under the category of soft skills.
Yeah, and I'm big on soft skills. So technically, it depends on what you're doing, and I don't always lead people that are doing PHP or doing the exact same languages I do. So technically, if I was going to lead people, that's a hard one.
Hold on. I mean, I wasn't saying that soft skills are bad.
Right.
I was actually going to agree with you, because as a mentor or someone who's trying to teach a junior developer, soft skills, you can't Stack Overflow for that. There's no, softskills.stackoverflow.com. You can't look that up. You can't Google it. How do I, make this the best user experience, or that sort of thing. And so those kinds of soft skills are something that I think gets overlooked a lot when it comes to mentoring, and it's probably one of the most important things that senior developers have that they can pass on to junior developers, is how to do those other non-technical things.
Cool.
So,
all right.
I'll agree with you faster next time.
Sorry, you're actually lagging a bit, so I'm not sure if you're done with your slots, and this Wi-Fi is not great.
Yeah, it's really your Wi-Fi, because you're fine over here. So, okay, so moving on. You have also written a book. Can you talk about your book for a minute?
I'd love to, because I like money, and it costs money. So my book is Building Secure PHP Apps, and especially with the iron-off experience back in the day, I got really interested in secure apps, how to secure them, how to hash passwords, everything involved. And I'd seen people do really horrible things with their code that's really scary. I've taken over a lot of legacy projects that are just begging to be hacked. Just throughout the years, you see so many just horribly done things. And so security has always been really interesting to me. But it's something that's hard for a lot of juniors or even mid-level developers to learn. It's something you just kind of pick up over the years. You mess up, or you see how someone else does it, and you learn these concepts. But the basics are really hard to just kind of find a source for. You can't just go on Stack Overflow and type in security, So that was really where I came at it from, is if I was training a junior developer, what are the minimum things I would want them to know about basic app security before letting them write an app. So I try to cover everything. I don't go into too much detail on any one thing, maybe password hashing, because I kind of geek out over that. But I really just try to cover the basics. It's a short read, it's like 100 pages. and it should give you the basics of what you need to know to build a secure PHP app.
Okay, so password hashing, you cover that pretty in depth. Is that
I don't cover
before
it like Anthony Ferrara in depth, but I cover it like mid-level in depth, maybe.
Okay, fair enough. And you also have a Node version that you're working on?
I'm working on it.
Is that right?
I'm working on it means I wrote one chapter, and now I haven't touched it in a month, and I really need to. But I will finish it, and it will be awesome. It's just it's going to be the same exact book, but the code samples and the text where it mentions PHP specific things will be changed for JavaScript and for Node. The idea originally when I wrote the book was that I would do separate versions for different languages. So I've also tossed around doing a Python or Ruby version in the future. But with the time it takes to write a book, which I didn't realize exactly how hard it was when I started the process, I probably will stop with PHP and Node. And so, it'll be the same book but different code examples, so you can cover both topics.
Okay, fair enough. First off, we have you on recording now, saying that you're going to finish it, so now you have to. Other than that, let's talk about writing a book a little bit. So you said it's harder than you thought it would be, or I guess more time intensive. You didn't really say harder, more time intensive. What do you think is the biggest hurdle when it comes to writing a book?
The biggest hurdle really seems to be like actually sitting down and writing. It feels like such a bigger commitment than, say, a blog post. So a blog post you can sit down and knock out in 30 minutes or an hour, and that's easy to kind of gear your mind towards. But to really sit down and write a book chapter takes maybe a week of nights to do it well. And it's just a very different mindset. It's easier for me to procrastinate it, and it's hard to get through it. It's also you have to have a more cohesive flow. So a blog post you can get in and out of real quick. You cover one small topic. But if you're going to do a book, you want it to really kind of flow and cover more. Could just be that I'm not a great writer, but that part is really difficult for me.
Okay, so from the point that you had the idea to write your book to the point that it was finished, how long did it take you?
I want to say about 5 months. So I worked on it pretty slowly at first, talked about some ideas. David Stanley helped me a lot to kind of work out what it should cover, what it shouldn't cover. And then I started going through chapters. Actually, it was probably a good 6 or 7 months because it spent about 2 months in editing and review, changing things, stuff like that. So it was a decent little process to get it out.
So you had David Stanley helping you. Did you have other people rubber ducking or editing for you?
Yeah, so I had
after the fact?
I had 3 editors. So there's David Stanley, and I'm going to look up Eric's last name. 1 second. Oh, Aiken. I said Eric. Aiken Roberts and Mike Wells. Mike Wells is an old CodeIgniter guy for those that remember me from those days. And so they went through it, they reviewed it. They did both like grammar editing and technical editing. Aiken did most of the grammar stuff, which was amazing because I have horrible grammar, and I didn't even know how bad it was until he told me that this is complete shit. Redo it, basically. So.
Okay. All right, and I completely lost my train of thought, so we're going to move on. Back to CodeIgniter. Actually, we had Sammy K come in with a question about CodeIgniter.
All right. Sammy K.
So let's do a little bit of setup on that, and then I'll ask Sammy's question. So first of all, you're on the CodeIgniter Council. How did that come to be? How did you get there?
So I used to be very involved in CodeIgniter. I have the IONOF, which is still one of the more popular CodeIgniter libraries as far as I can tell. And BCIT recently purchased CodeIgniter from LS Lab. BCIT is the British Columbia Institute of Technology. And I don't know how any of the business stuff worked, but they purchased CodeIgniter, and now they're the new owner. So they reached out to several community members because they're trying to foster a more open source environment for CodingNighter, whereas LS Lab was open source, but it was a fairly closed community of people that could actually make a difference. So they really care about open source at BCIT, and they're working on it. So I was one of the people they reached out to for possible council members, and I agreed, joined up, and I've been doing it for probably 6 months now.
Is that council listed anywhere, or was it announced? Did I miss that?
It was announced, and it's listed on the CodingNighter website.
Cool. So how many of you are there?
I have no idea. We changed out a few
Okay,
people.
a
It's kind of
bunch.
a revolving door, so it's based on people that have the time to be active. So there's no like
Okay.
shame in saying I'm busy right now. I have to jump out, and then we'll pull more people in.
Fair enough. Okay, so the question that came from Sammy King, now that we know how the council thing happened, what modernizations are being done to CodeIgniter while keeping it noob friendly? Yeah, go ahead and answer that one first, and then I'll ask the next one, because he asked two at a time. Cheating.
All right, cheating, Sammy K. So right now, version 3 is where all the development effort is. Version 3 has been in process for a long time, and it was kind of set in stone a while back. So it's still very legacy type CodingNighter code, and no one's going to be impressed by it really. But we had a lot of people already using it because it had been out for so long in this kind of weird beta state. So we felt it was important to finish it up and get it out the door so that people could stabilize their environments they already have. And while we're doing that, we've been having discussions on where we want to take version 4. The discussions are still in flux, and we have very different personalities involved in the council that have differing opinions. So we're still voting on things. But right now it looks like we'll at least probably do PSR 4. I'm saying these things, and I don't want to commit the council to them because it's still in discussion. So take this with a grain of salt. This is not for sure at all. But so we'll probably do PSR 4, and PSR 1 is in talks. PSR 2 is also in talks. I would like to see PSR 2 and 4 at least, but we'll see where that goes. A big part of it is that we have to play nice with the composer if we want to be modern in any way. Also, unit testing is a big focus, so we'll probably move to a real dependency injection container instead of the weird super global stuff that CodingNighter has now. So testability, more modern code, auto-loading, those would be the main features we try to hit. But then we're going to try to really keep the idea that you can load up CodingNighter as is and build a site with it. You shouldn't need to pull in a bunch of outside things to do that. We will try to outsource things that we can. So someone how Laravel uses Symfony components, we'll probably do stuff like that, or we use other vendors' components to do things. But we will keep it a cohesive framework. It won't be like a Slim or something like that, where you just get the bare bones pieces. We will keep it everything a new needs to get a site done, basically.
Okay. Since we're talking about 3 real quick, what do you know? Can you tease any new features that are coming to 3 that maybe someone who hasn't played with 3 doesn't know about?
I don't know. I haven't actually worked with 3 in a while. 3's been in a pretty stable state for probably over a year now, so it's really kind of old news to me at this point. I don't remember any killer features. There's a lot of cleanup and a lot of fixing of V2 bugs.
Okay, fair enough. The other half of Sammy K's question is, will incorrect names such as active record be fixed?
Active record will most likely be fixed. Sammy K. Hope that makes you happy.
Okay. That makes me happy. I don't know if that matters, but it does.
For those that don't know, and a lot of people probably don't, active record is a name for a pattern that actually means something. And CodingNighter named their DB object active record for some reason, and it doesn't follow that pattern at all. So it's really just kind of it's cheating to call it that when it's actually not that.
Yes, it is. Skipping back a little bit, just because I'm thinking about it now. one of the great things about CodeIgniter back in the day was that it was very well documented. And that's actually something that was really, really great about Ionos, was that it was really well documented. And I know that as a user of it. So I know that's something that a lot of package maintainers sometimes struggle with, myself included. Do you have any advice, tips, tricks? How do you handle documentation?
It's really about realizing that that is your user's UI. So as a developer, your UI into the code is the documentation. And think about the code you most want to use. When I go looking for libraries to use or whatever, if it's not well documented, I'm probably not going to use it unless it's popular. And then I might invest the time. But it's a lot of time investment to really dig through the code and figure out what's happening under the hood. So your documentation is really the most important part. It's better to have good documentation and less features. And that was really just kind of always a guiding principle for CodeIgniter, and I took that over to Ionoff. And it meant a lot that a user should be able to come in and read the docs and immediately get started without having to figure it out. And it's more, this kind of goes into a little bit of like caring about your users, not just about the code. Because I get pissed off when I try to use a library and there's some undocumented feature and I have no idea how it works and I have to go dig through their source code to figure it out. It's not a good experience. You don't enjoy that usually. So it's nice to remove that barrier for people.
Increase the popularity of IO?
It probably did. That's something you really can't like measure, I guess. But I imagine that made it more popular and that you could easily get started and know how to use it.
You mean you didn't A/B test your package with
I didn't.
documentation?
I'll just remove the docs and see what happens for a little while.
Awesome. Okay, so we're running short on time here, but I wanted to, any advice you have for someone who wants to write an open source package but hasn't yet for whatever reason, what advice would you have to get them started?
Definitely documentation, as we just covered, because that means a lot to people coming in. It doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of people want to make this perfect, fully featured thing before they release it. It just needs to do one thing pretty well, and then you can add features later if you then need to. It's great to use a library that just does one thing or a couple things really well. It doesn't have to do everything that's possible. So don't let that hold you back. Don't think, oh, if I just add these 20 features, it'll be great, but then I don't get around to it. So be quick to release it, but make sure what it does well. Don't release like hacky things. Also, just really think about the API when you write it. So a lot of people release libraries with names that make sense to them, or they don't really think about the naming or the way the methods will be called. Just because it does the function doesn't mean it's good. So think about, how will this be used in user land? When someone uses this in a controller or a model or whatever, when they're calling these methods, how do they fit together? Do they make a cohesive API? Can you guess the next method name based on the previous method name you used? Like with authentication as an example, do you know how to get a list of groups if you already know how to get a list of users? You should be able to make that cognitive leap and just guess. Because if the method names and the API is consistent, it should just work like that. That's one reason that Laravel got so popular, is because their API is super consistent and clean. And by API, I don't necessarily mean like a RESTful API. I mean the interface that you have to that library, so the methods that you call on it, and the way you instantiate objects, things like that.
Okay, all good advice. I think a place where a lot of people might get stuck is, I have this idea for a package. I don't know if it's a good idea. How would you suggest someone test the mettle of an idea?
Usually I have a few friends that I trust, people that I know had put out good work before, and I'll just bounce ideas off them. Also, Twitter's a good place. Don't be too scared of it. I haven't had much very negative feedback in that space. People are usually glad to help. It might be kind of harsh sometimes, because maybe you really care about this idea and somebody says, oh, I'd never use that. They don't take that too personally. It's just a problem they don't have. So always, put it out there. Ask some friends, ask people on Twitter. See if it's something that people need. You can also, there's sites, there's Hacker News or Reddit. I'm recommending Reddit to someone. That's horrible. But you can join discussions there, see if people are talking about similar ideas, and see if your solution would help them.
Okay. All right, so we are nearly done. We've got 4 minutes left, and we haven't talked about probably the most important thing that you've done in recent years, at least. So, GluttonyCon.
GluttonyCon. I gained 4 pounds from GluttonyCon.
That's hilarious because I totally lost weight. So, how did I guess when is the next GluttonyCon? I was going to ask questions, but then I realized that I'm the co-organizer, so I don't actually have any.
Yeah.
Except
So
for that
let's
one.
give people some background. We threw GluttonyCon, which was a horribly thrown together last-minute idea in New York. Was it last month? Yeah.
February?
Yeah. And so basically, we just ate a lot of food all around New York for a few days. And we tried different cuisines, lots of drinks, and we ate more than you ever should in a few days. And it was delicious.
It's a very true story. And we encourage everyone to do this as well. And we actually did it right in the middle of Thin the Herd, which was very well timed. There was actually somebody on Twitter, and I don't remember their name, talking about doing a West Coast GluttonyCon.
This is David Mosher talking about doing it in Reno, I believe, right?
Yeah, something about ribs.
Yes. Apparently Reno has good ribs. David, when I lived in Vegas, David was always trying to convince me to come up for ribs, and I just didn't really believe him that Reno had good ribs. So I never made it up.
I don't buy it, but if GluttonyCon's there, I might go. So, there you go, David. Prove that there are good ribs for GluttonyCon. And we do actually have stickers. Anywho, enough promotion of a quasi-conference. Anything else for the good of the cause, Mr. Edmunds?
No, if anyone needs help with talks, abstracts, or even open source ideas, feel free to reach out. Easiest place is probably Twitter. I will be glad to help anyone with things like that. Also, just a little self-promotion. There's a coupon code for my book. It's no capes, so feel free to use that. Save $3 off.
Yes, I will put that with the notes for this. Not
Cool.
that
Thank you.
I've ever done notes before, but I will for this one. And also, regarding abstracts, I may or may not have purchased a domain while we were doing this, so someone should watch my Twitter later for the purpose of something related to helping you with abstracts, if that's something that you want help with.
Nice. Cool.
Cool. So thank you all. Thank you, Ben, for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a blast. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.